All right, so continuing on where we left off, hopefully this will be the last segment in this rather lengthy super lecture, you might say. Um, we were in the midst of discussing the stock market crash that would serve as the catalyst for the Great Depression itself. By October of 1929, the worst economic crash in American history would occur. And within weeks, benchmark stocks lost nearly all of their value. The drop in stocks was so precipitous that the ticker tape machine that would rattle off the stock and its value, the actual machine used to show the prices of the stocks, had fallen behind the actual uh, pace of how quickly these stocks were dropping in value. So, simply because the ticker tape was coming across where it would read off a certain stock at a certain price, by the time the ticker tape got around to showing that stock at that price, the price of the actual stock itself had dropped below that. To give you some examples as to exactly how bad things got with regard to some of these iconic brands and their stock value was concerned, we have Montgomery Ward, kind of a retailer of the age. In 1929, it had a stock share value of $138 per share. By 1932, it was selling at $4 a share. And the stock market index itself dropped from 1929, dropped from 210 points. By 1932, it was hovering around 30 points. Within 3 years of the crash, 75% of the value of all securities, some $90 billion in total, had disappeared. And wages, household wages, dropped 20%. And those were for households that of families, family members, heads of households that were able to keep their jobs in the midst of the worst of the depression itself. So it can't be stressed enough exactly how devastating this economic meltdown really was for the United States. I mean that the GDP, the gross national, I should say, the gross domestic product, um, was cut in half for the United States. Um, Jobs disappeared, whole companies disappeared, and as a result, it led to massive hardships throughout American society. In the midst of all this, there were certain reactions. Government turned to hiking up tariffs. This can best be seen with the passage of what's called the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930. This is a protective tariff designed to compel Americans to buy up domestic surpluses. So again, you're raising tariffs on foreign-made goods in order to encourage uh, citizens to buy domestic goods. But this cut off again the potential ability to sell surplus goods overseas or to other countries at the very least, because it's going to trigger in kind those kinds of hikes of tariffs, protective tariffs by other countries as well. And in the end, in the long run, this really worsened the crisis for not only the United States, but for all the countries of Europe and Japan as well. In the United States, in 1932, again, the GNP, gross national product, was cut in half. Unemployment hit a high of 25%. That's basically 1 in 4 Americans unemployed. Another 25 to 33% of Americans were underemployed. And that was just among the white male or white American population. Unemployment among the African American community was usually hovering between 50 and 60%. Throughout the decade of the 1930s, overall unemployment um, as a whole stayed between 10 and 15%. And between 1929 and 1933, over 10,000 banks failed nationwide, with over 5,000 of these occurring within the year 1933 alone. And the reason for that, again, was because of this idea of buying on the margins, that banks had grown accustomed to speculating so much in the stock market that it made it, when the stock market collapsed, the banks were left holding on to these worthless stocks. They were calling in money, loans on these margins in order to meet their own obligations, but they were calling in these loans from rank and file Americans that didn't have the money, and so as a result, the banks just simply went under. They could not, and they did not have the capital, the actual money available to keep their doors open. By 1933, 50% of home mortgages were in default. You had the seizure of properties by banks, because they're the ones that hold the mortgages, in order to try and recoup losses. But again, banks had property, but they couldn't get rid of it. They couldn't sell it because no one was willing to buy property. They didn't have the money available to purchase property. This also had a psychological toll. Birth rates across the United States declined. Suicides went up, especially among the male population. They considered themselves to be a failure. They were failing to provide for their families. The American dream is dead on arrival. Young men resorted to running away from home in order to try and ease the burden on their own families. But it also led to a growing transient population looking for work. And so, without work being had, you had these individuals using the railroads to try and find work for themselves, just basically hitching rides on the tops of rail cars. This is also going to, in the area of foreign relations, intensify isolationist impulses. That basically, countries suffering from the Great Depression looked to facilitate as much recovery as possible for their own populations, for their own citizens. And they really didn't care about the international community as a whole. Case in point, the FDR's New Deal programs came into effect when he was elected into office in 1932. He won in a landslide victory. He begins to use government to, first and foremost, backstop the banks, to basically allow for the banks to collect themselves, and also use the government to invest funds in troubled banks until they could themselves recover. And they allowed the FDR and his administration allowed the government to exert greater control over the money supply. Legislation like that, things like the Glass-Steagall Act, which created the FDIC, the Insuring Bank Deposits, which continues today, um, passed Congress within 8 hours. And this was done mostly to restore confidence, the public's confidence in the banking industry itself and in the banks, because people were going to the banks, pulling out their money as quickly as possible in order to make sure that their funds were not just simply vanishing before their eyes. Government funds were also used to sponsor programs to employ people and rebalance the economy throughout the life of the New Deal era, the 1930s. All sectors of the economy were a part of this process. In industry, you had the National Recovery Act, where government, business, and labor worked together. They set prices, they set fair codes of conduct, they set production levels and minimum wages for workers. So what this did is it helped to mitigate the chronic problem of overproduction. It also allowed workers that were able to be employed to earn a living wage for themselves and their families. It also established maximum hours that could be worked as well. The government supported the right of workers to unionize and to collectively bargain for wages. Um, and for also for not only wages but also benefits and contracts as well. This is the first time in American history that the government really kind of served as an advocate for the working class. In the industry of agriculture, you had the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which paid farmers to destroy their crops and livestock. Again, the idea of overproduction. There was so much food, a glut of food in the pipeline, in the system, going from the farms to the markets to the households, that the crops that were growing in the fields did not have any ready buyers. And so, in order to drive prices up for the existing crops that were already en route to market, um, the government paid farmers to till under or to destroy their livestock, and to cull their herds in order to, again, prop up the industry itself, drive prices up, to basically promote a sense of scarcity. This is a paradoxical kind of approach, because people were going hungry in the United States, in the midst of crops being destroyed, cattle being culled, and in the midst of this overproduction. Why was that? Well, because people couldn't afford to buy food in many cases. So it really was this kind of almost a perfect storm, but also a unique set of circumstances that affected not only the United States, but again, virtually any country suffering from the Great Depression itself. A scarcity amidst a time of plenty in many cases. Artists, writers also participated, basically creating artwork and writing material for these programs, these various programs. You also had a systematic forest conservancy going on with things like the Civilian Conservation Corps, um, and many, many other programs, public programs, government programs, in order to keep people working, active. And as the uh, decade moved along, the 1930s moved along, uh, it's important to understand that FDR and his administration was not necessarily trying to implement a socialist type of a government, but instead he was trying to create programs to act as a holdover until the economy could recover, until people could move back into the private sector, and then the government could wind down these programs, these kind of uh, kind of public service type of activities. And that was the intent of FDR all along, was to make sure that they would that this wouldn't become kind of a, a sustained effort on the part of the government. Because again, FDR was a committed liberal, but he was one that was committed to um, capitalism and private enterprise, and private property and so on and so forth. That this, in many cases, was just simply a pump priming type of endeavor, where the government would inject money, open up opportunities for people to temporarily work in service of the government during the worst days of the Depression itself. By 1935, the FDR administration, it's close to its second term, also enacted what was known as the Social Security Act, to help keep vulnerable populations, in this case the elderly, out of poverty, to lessen the burden of having the families, children in the prime of life, have to care for their parents as they aged. So the government allowed for Social Security to be withdrawn from paychecks, not as an investment, but more as a savings type of program that would be reimbursed during the senior years of one's life. It was not meant to serve as a sole source of income. It was meant to augment income in retirement, which it continues to do to this day, although uh, you know, the longevity of Social Security is in doubt. This is, in essence, the only piece of New Deal legislation that still remains in effect today, with a few exceptions, such as the FDIC, the Federal Insurance Deposit Insurance Corporation, which also continues. In Germany, you have a different tact being taken. The socialist, or excuse me, the fascist regime in Germany, the National Socialist Party, won a majority in the Reichstag, the German parliament, in 1933, because the National Socialist Party won the largest number of seats. Basically, I think it won about a third of the seats, which was the largest single party faction within the entirety of the Reichstag itself. They were able to put forward Adolf Hitler as their party leader, and therefore made him eligible to become chancellor in 1933, which did become a reality. Very quickly, the National Socialist Party, uh, under Hitler's leadership, created a one party state. They began to ban and outright dissolve any type of opposition parties. The German Reichstag itself was burned, um, and as a result of that process, that incident was blamed on the communists. It was most likely set by the National Socialists themselves. And this was all pretext for declaring martial law, which, in response to the burning of the Reichstag, the National Socialist Party did. So, what this meant is that, for all intents and purposes, Germany became a fascist state, that the vestiges and the institutions of liberal democracy were uh, destroyed. According to the fascist political philosophy, again, that we talked about in the previous segments, you're talking about social, political, cultural, and economic cohesion, homogeneity. This is an absolutist type of political organization. Individuality, again, was suppressed. Everyone's effort is devoted to the advancement of the nation. The nation's success equaled individuals' success within the nation itself. And also, this was predicated heavily on a state run economy to benefit not only industry, but again, the state and therefore the citizens of the country. Many believed that this helped to mitigate the economic hardship within states like Germany. And in fact, because the state was largely responsible and took a very proactive role with regard to establishing programs to ease the effects of the Great Depression, the economic calamity, on rank and file citizens, it meant that the government in places like Germany could take much quicker action, much more direct action, and intervene for the benefit of the citizens themselves, which uh, did happen, but it obviously came at a price of individual freedom. There was also, again, within the fascist regimes, a staunch opposition to communist political philosophy itself. So Hitler, in 1934, becomes Der Fuhrer, a leader with a mystical tie to the people of Germany, the folk, and the people of the German nation. In many cases, this was quite reminiscent to expressions of Japanese imperial identity, you might say. Uh, Hitler proceeded to launch campaigns to bring German populations back within the jurisdiction of the German nation itself. Because of the redrawing of lines on the map of Europe, this meant that German populations were now living outside of the formal borders and boundaries of Germany itself. Hitler wanted to reverse all that. And so in 1936, he proceeded to march German troops into the Rhineland. In 1938, in March of that year, he conducts what's called the Anschluss, roughly translates as union. to bring, excuse me, to bring Austria together with the German speakers of the German nation itself as well. Austria and Germany share that common cultural bond of speaking German. Uh, in October of 1938, you have the occupation of the Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia at the time. Hitler argued that this part of Czechoslovakia was majority German, and should therefore those individuals, those peoples, should be under German authority, German law, and not Czechoslovakian law. There's also going to be increased anti-Semitic activity. The rights of Jews in Nazi Germany were revoked in 1935. In November of 1938, there is what's known as the Kristallnacht, which is uh, the destruction of Jewish homes, synagogues, and businesses, um, the destruction of property, Jewish property across the German nation itself. In essence, you have a pogrom being committed against the Jewish populations of Germany. And that's what you can see here in this image in the lower corner is the burning of a synagogue. In the upper corner here, you can see the efforts through geography, to expand the borders of Germany. In those examples that I mentioned, these areas here in orange are the uh, Sudetenland, this Anschluss with Austria, and also the Rhineland here on the western fringes of the German state as well. There's also going to be the active targeting of not only Jewish populations, but also non Jewish populations as well, those deemed threats to the German people. This would include political prisoners, specifically communists, but it would also include the likes of gypsies, those who are mentally or physically challenged, non German populations, and again, Jews. In 1936, Berlin hosted the Olympic Games. Hitler saw this as his opportunity to showcase German superiority as the kind of supreme or master race. But this myth was destroyed by the likes of, among others, Jesse Owens, who you can see an image of here in track and field events. Jesse Owens, of course, being an African American who had attended Ohio State University and had won accolades in track and field. And in 1936, he was not only an Olympian but also a gold medal Olympian in several different events. So. Uh, Turning attention to Russia under Joseph Stalin's regime, he is going to move toward industrialization of the Russian state. He is also going to enact policies of um, collectivization of the agricultural industry. This would result in mass starvation because of the inefficiency of the overall program itself. So individual farmers will be responsible for uh, overseeing growing crops on established plots of land. They would sow the crops, harvest the crops, and then those crops would be centrally localized or collectivized into central locations where they would be then transported and redistributed throughout the population of uh, Russia itself. The idea here was that rural communities within Russia would ship vast amounts of and quantities of food to the urban centers to help stitch this urban rural divide together, uh, to promote kind of a communist united front, if you will. And again, it was a disaster. Crops couldn't be moved fast enough. The amount of food that was shipped to the major cities of Russia was disproportionate to the population, which meant that vast majority of agricultural workers in the rural portions of Russia were left destitute and hungry. Famine set in, and there was the loss of life during this period of time because of the poor infrastructure of moving food shipments. This meant that food did not move quickly enough, and vast quantities of food spoiled even before it could make it um, to the major cities for consumption. Uh, Also, during this period of time, Joseph Stalin, as if to add insult to injury, conducted repeated political purges to create a sense of social and political paranoia within the country itself, which was conversely highly successful. Um, this these efforts targeted anyone opposing Soviet policies or questioning Stalin's courses of action. This could include not only bureaucrats, but also leading intellectuals, military officers, as well as rank and file citizens. And it would lead to the death of uh, millions even before the formal outbreak of World War II itself. Outwardly, that was within domestic Russia. Outwardly, the image of Russia being this land of plenty, of being predominantly immune to the effects of the depression, was kind of the face put on Russia by itself to the international community, and it was highly effective. Many people within the United States and elsewhere around the world, particularly in Western Europe, began to promote ideas of establishing a popular front with Joseph Stalin and his communist regime, working to ally themselves with the communists against what they perceived to be a greater ideological threat, that being German and Italian fascism within Europe itself. The general takeaway of all of this is that these factors combined would increase the likelihood of conflict, economic hardship, increasing amounts of scarcity and food shortages that people could not see to their day to day survival, a sense of impending doom, as seen through kind of persecution. Here, not only within Germany, but within places like Russia as well. All of these things created a sense of foreboding and instability. By the time World War II begins to ramp up, the world as a whole is kind of ripe for that type of conflict. As far as World War II is concerned, we often think of it in European terms, but it should be noted that war had already been going on within East Asia for some time in what's known as the Second Sino Japanese War, um, ranging, as you can see, from 1937 to 1945. I'm almost out of time here. Let me double check. Yeah, I'm almost out of time, so I'll come back and finish up this lecture in the next segment. So I'll be right back.